Den of the Wolfman, a novella prequel for the novel Wild River by Ronald M. Kimmons. Chapter 8. A parade of images flashed through Bondas's mind. The totem was not tied to any particular memory, so everything flowed outward in a jumble. Bondas saw faces, places, some of them in Wild River, work, carousing, prostitutes, food. He stopped at one image. He was staring into the mirror, but the face that he saw was not his own. The man had pale skin, a few shades lighter than Bondas, with black hair, a black beard, and blue eyes. This man was likely in his early 40s, and he was missing one of his canine teeth. The images blew by again. Work, walking, carousing, prostitutes, murder. Bondas felt the soft tissue give way as he sank his teeth into Elijah Trencher's calf, ripping the meat away as one would with a poultry leg. Bondas dropped the necklace. "Riverman, are you all right?" Bondas sat in the grass for a moment. Yes, he said. "Sorry, I'm just a bit fatigued, I think." He put his glove back on and handed the necklace back to Cartman. "Don't overwork yourself," said Cartman. "You're no good to anyone if you're dead, too." "Right, yes." "Do you know anything about this thing, then?" "No, I do not," said Bondas. "I wish I did." "Well, let's stay in touch. Let me know if you find anything else." Cartman walked back toward the brick building. "Pardon me now, but I have some more notes to take." It took a moment for Bondas to recover, but once he had, he got to his feet and started walking. He was not entirely sure where he was going, but he had a strong suspicion that he needed to get back to the Volar quarter. As he walked, his mind raced, piecing together the massive images that he had just experienced. There was one image that he was specifically trying to focus upon. It was difficult, like when someone is trying to recall a specific word that one knows to exist, but cannot specifically remember. As he continued to walk, though, it gradually coalesced within his mind. It was a specific building that he had seen in the Volar quarter, with broad sliding doors opening onto multiple levels of wraparound balconies, as was characteristic of old Volar buildings. As the corner of the building came into view, he knew immediately that this was, in fact, the building from his vision. Bondas passed the cart of a street vendor who was selling jelly fritters. His stomach rumbled with hunger, and he considered stopping for a bit to eat. But he figured that likely would not be a good idea if he was about to either get into a fight or find some putrid remains. He walked by a knife shop and saw its wares in the window. Something suddenly caught his eye. Some brass knuckles. Feeling a sudden need for some weaponry beyond just the cane that he carried, he went in and bought the piece, slipping it into his pocket. Reaching the building in question, Bondas saw that the front door and windows were boarded up. This was not a surprise, though. He circled around to the back and found a small door to the alleyway that was similarly boarded up. Looking around, he tried to find something that he could use to pry away the boards. But then he had a thought. Noticing that there was space enough to crawl between the boards, he reached past them and tried the doorknob. The door opened easily. After looking around one more time and seeing no one, Bondas took his hat into his hand and crawled through the opening into the darkness. He left the door open, as there was little light in the place. He tried his best to walk quietly, but between the heavy heels of his boots and the dilapidated state of the boards under his feet, that proved a vain endeavor. He surveyed the room, blinking in the darkness, and took in the shapes of furniture covered in white sheets. It was as if a convocation of phantasms watched him. Bondas walked through the breakfast area and kitchen, then through the parlor. Direct sunlight on the parlor window cast several lines of light through the boards, and that allowed Bondas to see the pale film of dust that coated the entire floor. He then saw what he was looking for, a trail through the dust, where someone had apparently walked between the back door and the stairs numerous times in the recent past. Looking up the staircase, Bondas held his cane up as if to fight with it, and he reached his other hand into his pocket to take hold of the brass knuckles. He proceeded quickly up the stairs, which, of course, creaked and groaned shamelessly under his feet. Reaching the landing, he continued up to the 3rd floor. There he found a corridor with 5 doors, all of them closed. He took hold of the first doorknob and threw the door open, or tried to, as settling in the frame of the house had caused it to scrape the floor. He found a child's bedroom there. The floor was covered in dust, just as the rest of the house had been. but there were footprints as if someone had walked around in there a few times to view the toys and trinkets on the shelves. Bondus closed the door and moved to the next room. Each room showed similar signs of someone having recently moved about the place. However, the foot patterns on the floor suggested that the room at the end of the corridor was where this person had spent most of his time. Readjusting his grip on the cane, Bondus used his hand with the brass knuckles to open the door. This room was, in fact, different. A book sat on the nightstand. While the nightstand was as dusty as the rest of the house, the book was not. Bondus squinted to read the title, The Curious Case of Mr. Smith. Then there was the bed. While the other beds had remained undisturbed and covered in dust, the bedclothes on this one had been removed and thrown in the corner, and the mattress had clearly been used recently. Some random pieces of trash from consumable items lay scattered across the floor, and a single candlestick stood on the floor close to the bed. In the center of the room, though, there was a pile of bones. One normally would not think it so strange for a squatter to leave a pile of bones. Squatters do eat, after all. The bones of poultry, fish, and herd animals need to go somewhere, and squatters tend to not be the most fastidious of cleaners. This pile was particularly curious, though. The bones were all rather large and curved. In fact, they all seemed nearly identical. Bondus squatted by the pile and picked one up with a gloved hand. The horror of what he was looking at dawned upon him then. This was, in fact, a human rib. It seemed that the same rib had been taken from a number of people and collected here. This was not a pile of trash. It was an altar, made of tokens, taken from the Wolfman's victims. Bondus considered removing a glove and trying to get a vision from the perspective of one of the victims, but he decided against it. That kind of experience took a toll on him every time, and he needed to focus on what was most relevant. He stood and walked over to the bed. In the bed, he could see the impression made by the house's inhabitant. He could even see a couple of hairs on the pillow. He removed his bowler cap again, hung it on the bedpost, and lay in the bed as if to sleep. He then closed his eyes, holding his cane to his chest, and let his mind drift. What Bondus saw now could be described as a collage of a man's life over the past several months. Unlike the disorderly vision that had greeted him when he had taken the totem in his hand, these images proceeded linearly, from getting out of bed to returning to it. He fell into the routine of this man's life. He made the daily journey to the docks, did his time there, and came back. Sometimes he would go to a pub or a brothel. Sometimes he would see someone, perhaps a prostitute, perhaps not, and feel the hunger. Bondus found himself following a woman down the street at night. He gradually quickened his pace. She was about to reach an alleyway that could prove the prime location for his noble act. Anticipation drove him forward. She turned and looked behind in alarm. That caused something inside him to snap, and he dashed toward her. Bondus opened his eyes and sat up with a start. He felt sick and disoriented. In the dark, he scrambled to regain a sense of who he was. Looking down, he felt the cane and the brass knuckles in his hands. These were like anchors that he pulled upon to come back to himself. The killer did not have such things. The killer was not Bondus. Bondus was not the killer. Bondus came to his feet, put his bowler cap back on, and hurried out the bedroom door, closing it as he went. The light leaking into the house was even dimmer now. It was late in the day, and he needed to get out before the killer returned. As he raced through the house, crawled through the boards in the door, and hurried through the streets, his mind went through an inventory of the images and feelings that had flooded into it. He had to take each of these items and clearly mark it. This is mine. This is his. He came to the main street again, still busy with pedestrian traffic. There he saw a lovely woman in a sky-blue dress. Somewhere inside him, there was a creeping desire to rip her clothes off and sink his teeth into her flesh, to hear her beg for mercy, to hear her scream, and to finally silence that scream. She met his gaze, and a hint of his thoughts was probably on his face, because she turned away and quickened her pace. The realization of the feelings underlying her reaction is what really shocked him back to reality. No, this was not his identity. This was someone else inside his mind. He suddenly felt as if he had fallen subject to something between infection and rape. He felt as if his soul itself needed to vomit. He needed to expurgate this. Bondus made his way to a park and sat on a bench to catch his breath. As he sifted through images, sensations, and feelings associated with the murders, he had to clearly tell himself, I never did that. I never did that. I never did that. This was an empowering and liberating exercise. The longer this went, the lighter and brighter he felt. It was exactly the same as awakening from the most horrible nightmare and then emerging to see smiling faces on a lovely morning. I never did that. I never did that. I never did that. And then his mind stopped on the image of a slave girl, many years ago, bound and gagged. His initial response had been to do as he had done with the other images, labeling it as something alien and casting it far away from his own identity. But no, he remembered. He remembered that this memory was his memory. He wished that he could cast it away, but he knew that he could not. And the idea of doing so felt almost as wrong as the wrongness he had felt in the crimes he had just witnessed. No, he would hold on to this one. He had to. Bondas slumped against the back of the bench. It had taken him a little while, but he did feel better now. His mind was clearing. It certainly helped to watch children running about in the park, playing tag. He looked down and realized that he still had his fingers through the brass knuckles. He put that shiny piece of hardware away again. A vendor was passing close by with a cart of fried bread. Bondas held out 2 coppers and bought some. He removed his gloves and took it in both hands, feeling the coarse skin of the thing between his fingers and biting into it with great satisfaction. It was perfect, crunchy outer skin with soft, chewy insides that tore away easily. He took a sip of water from the flask that he always carried, and he then continued to eat. Contrasted against the nightmare that he had just experienced, this moment of peace, eating something tasty while gazing at the long shadows of the setting sun, suddenly seemed like one of the defining moments of his life. He felt as if he had just conquered a great unseen enemy, and had now emerged into a more beautiful world. A man came and sat beside him on the bench. He was an old man with scraggly clothes. He was clearly a homeless drifter, but he did not stink in the way Bondas would have expected. This sudden proximity seemed a little curious from a complete stranger, but Bondas, caught up in his reverie, thought nothing of it. He stared straight ahead blankly and continued biting at the fried bread until about 1/5 of it was left. It was then that the old man spoke. "Did you see what happened to me?" he asked. Bondas turned to him. Looking him in the eyes, deep green eyes like leaves at the height of summer, Bondas recognized him. He had just seen this man's face in his vision. Bondas had witnessed the Wolfman brutally murdering this fellow when he stumbled upon the Wolfman finishing off one of his other victims. The normal thing to do would have been to jump or shout in surprise or fear. Still halfway immersed in the mist of dream, though, Bondas did nothing of the sort. He answered matter-of-factly. "I did," said Bondas. "What happened to you, it was terrible." "Are you going to avenge me?" asked the old man. "I will find him. I will stop him." "What about me?" asked a female voice. Bondas turned to the other side and saw a woman standing beside him. She was very pretty, with curly auburn hair and reddish-brown skin contrasting against a yellow dress. "I can't bring you back," he said. "I wish I could. That is beyond my power. I will find him, though, and I will stop him." "Good," she said. "Don't let him do it again. Don't let him do it to anyone else." "So you're going to the docks?" asked the old man. "I am," said Bondas. "Do you know which area at the docks?" "I do." With that, Bondas stood, brushed the crumbs from his hands, inserted his hands into his gloves again, and departed at a brisk pace. The scenes of the city, carriages, pedestrians, birds, provided a stimulus that gradually helped to pull him back into his present reality. He had been having visions such as these for many years, but none so vivid or immersive as this one, and none in which the figures of the dead seemed to appear to him outside of the vision itself. Clearly, lying in the Wolfman's bed had created a connection far stronger than anything he had experienced before. As his rational mind started to take control again, he wondered if the apparitions he had seen had been extensions of the vision, or if they were the actual spirits of the dead, or if, beyond simply having visions, he was now actually starting to test the boundaries of his own sanity.